Welcome to the Art of Conscious Living. I'm so very, very pleased today to have as my guest, Phillip Scott. Thank you for taking the time out to speak with me today. And
it's my pleasure. And it's a beautiful day outside with the rain. It's a real blessing here in California.
Absolutely, a cleansing is going on.
I mean, great purification,
yes.
And it's very sacred for Indigenous people to have that relationship with the Thunder Nation, Thunder beings, as we call them.
So tell me about your work and what you do. You have a center called Ancestral Ways.
Ancestral Voice,
Ancestral
Center for Indigenous
Voice.
Lifeways. Yes.
Okay.
The focus of the center is to preserve and apply, as well as to respectfully disseminate Indigenous ceremonial and sacred practices, which, as far as I'm concerned, are vital for our survival as a species. And so I travel around conducting ceremonies, teach intensives, all geared toward helping people to also remember their own indigenousness, because we all come from the earth. And so we are drawing upon these ancient traditions to help us remember fundamentally how to be a human being, which I believe that through our current Western civilization we have forgotten fundamentally how to be human.
So as we move into a modern way of working with technology, the ancient ways of being in touch with the humanness and the spirit is basically being overridden now, and it's forgotten and it's being pushed aside, where the Native American Indian was very, very much in touch with that. So you, as being, what would your title be now? Are you a leader? Are you a...
Yeah, I'm a ceremonial leader.
Yes.
I'm a chief in the Lakota tradition. I have Western Band Tsalagi, or Cherokee ancestry, on my father's side, and but I'm of mixed ancestry. I also have European ancestry as well, and so it's the balance.
And the Lakota, what area of the United States are they located?
They're principally located in the central portion of the United States, in the Dakotas area, in the Plains Nations section.
And is each tribe, do they have different belief systems or different ideology?
Absolutely. Yeah. At the time when Columbus arrived, the visitors came here to North America, there were over 550 tribes existing in Turtle Island itself, and each with their own distinctive language, culture, ideology, cosmology. So therefore it's difficult and actually disrespectful to kind of lump them all together as Native Americans, because the belief structure is quite vast.
That's very interesting. So what would be the major difference of what they would be thinking and practicing? And
well, again, because of the linguistic differences as well as the cultural and cosmological perspectives that are different, again, it's hard to distill, down to even what the differences are, because they are quite vast. At the same time, we can also see a lot of similarities in terms of the indigenous worldview, if you will. And that's not just here in North America, but essentially all over the world. A reliance upon an awareness of the unseen, the acknowledgement of the ancestors, the spirits, as well as a deep reverence in relationship to the earth. For example, many indigenous people, whether they be shamans or medicine people, they cultivate a very intimate relationship with the ancestral spirits that they work with. They also have a deep reverence for the earth, as well as to have a relationship with all of our relations. So the animals, the plants, the elementals, the stones, all of them form alliances with the practitioner, all for the purposes of healing. Because we are, as human beings, we are not the zenith of creation, whereas we are a part of the intricate web that grandmother spider has woven. And so we're actually the grandchildren. We are the youngest of the inhabitants here on this earth, and therefore we look to our elders for respect, for wisdom. And so the elementals, the plant nations, the animal nations, they have been here much longer than ourselves. And so they serve as our elders, and we petition them for guidance, for wisdom, to assist us so that we can maintain balance here on this earth. And I believe our current circumstances globally indicate that we are seriously out of balance. And so it really behooves us to, both individually and collectively, come back into balance for the welfare of all of our relations.
Absolutely. So how do you see this happening? How can this manifest all these beautiful things you're speaking about?
Well, I think it's both individually and collectively. So as a species, we have to understand what our responsibility is, right? And again, if we take a perception of domination, right, then we're going to continue on this course that we're currently on, which will not only destroy ourselves as a species, but will take many other species and destroy the earth. And so there will not be even a future legacy for 7 generations to come. Okay? So collectively, we have to understand that we are not the zenith and pinnacle of creation, but a part of this web. And therefore, to become stewards of this earth and to have respect for all of our relations. So that's the collective perspective. But then individually, each and every one of us has to do our part to purify, right? Because we are bombarded with toxins in our world. As a result of the Industrial Revolution and the spewing of toxins into our environment, both with the water, the land, the air, including our minds, right? So even our own thoughts can be rather toxic in terms of how we judge ourselves, how we criticize others. These toxins are also in our bodies and in our relationships. And so it is incumbent upon every individual to also do the necessary work to purify themselves, to heal themselves. There are many indigenous practices that afford this opportunity, right? So the healing work is necessary because as a result of the crucible of our family, of our society, of our relationships, there is a lot of wounding that takes place. So those wounds become the springboard for our awakening when we take the time to address what these wounds are, right? And that's where the purification comes in. That's where the healing is, so that we can transmute that poison, that toxin, into a medicine that can then help ourselves and be of service to other people. So that's what I see as vital for ourselves to achieve the sense of balance, the sense of what we call right relationship with our world. And it's really, for me, enlightenment is not a solitary affair. So each one of us as seekers must quest to heal our wounds and to awaken, but individually is not sufficient. We also must collectively awaken as a species to understand our place within this cosmos, within this vast universe, and to, and because of the crises that we're in, it's really a clarion call to step up, that we no longer have the time to squander or the energy to squander in this way. And so all of the political maneuvering that's going on, is not really serving what's happening in the greater scheme.
There's 2 ways of being in religion that I have looked at that I feel that is very doable, which is Hindu and Buddhism, and Native American Indigenous ways also. And the reason I say that is because they are about the body. They pay attention to the mind, and they pay attention to the spirit. A lot of the other religions are not of that, or that caliber, or of the same understanding of that. And what is your understanding, and what do you think of the other ways that have such a hold on so many people, of the religion, doctrine, or other teachings out there that have been from the beginning of time to the present time today? Where do you see all of that? Because I see that politics, religion, people can get lost in all these labels. Consumerism, society, it's basically culture. It's basically a label that people can get lost in and hide behind and basically not own their own energy.
Mm-hmm.
Where in Hindu, it's reverence. They see spirit in rocks and trees and spirit in everything, such as the Native American Indian does.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a part of interfaith councils for quite some time now, I tend not to judge the faith that calls an individual. I believe that all paths lead toward the source, and so I see a commonality, in terms of people's worship. For me, what becomes problematic is that when there's such a attachment to only seeing one way, right? That creates a divisiveness. But for me, I and many indigenous peoples live by the medicine wheel. And the medicine wheel is a way of life that involves inclusivity, right? So we see that each spiritual tradition is a spoke of the wheel that when pursued with heart and integrity can lead us to the source, can lead us back home. And so I tend not to judge other people's faith traditions, because as long as it's something that informs them with value in their lives, then it has merit. And I think that particularly in our society today, because if we look at the history of ourselves as human beings, some of the most vicious wars have been over faith. And so again, in our societies today, it's time that we begin to put down those hatchets, to pick up peace and begin to walk with that. And as far as I'm concerned, all faith traditions have a fundamental ground. So we can see the commonality of our desire for worship, our desire for sacred communion with the source and with the earth and with the ancestors in all the ways that, there's many different words to describe the ancestors. So there is a fundamental commonality of our humanity, and that really should be the tie that binds us together. Now, that's not to say that we can't have differences. Because of each person's uniqueness in this world, as a unique creation, everyone's going to have a unique perspective. And so there is diversity within creation. And so it's also being able to honor our differences, without letting that be a way of creating or engendering separation and distance. That there can still be unification. We can agree to disagree and still understand that there's a place in this world for everyone.
Do you have any idea how that could be implemented, how this could happen, and how the world religions could get together and talk and find the similarities?
Well, there are actually many forums right now. The Parliament of World Religions, for example, is one such example. There are many interfaith gatherings that are occurring. One thing that I lament about that is that there does not seem to be much indigenous representation at these interfaith gatherings and councils, with the exception of the Parliament of World Religions. So I like to see more inclusivity with the indigenous perspective, which, as I said, I feel is vital for our survival as a species today. So I think it is happening, but if we look at the world that we're in now, with the degree of strife, the key to peace is dialogue. And that's not just in terms of cultures or religions, but actually interpersonally. When we have differences with another individual, it's having the courage to sit down and to be able to articulate our truths, to speak openly from our perspective about what is our perspective on a particular issue, right? And to articulate and communicate in a way that is respectful and peaceful, even though we may not be in accord with the subject matter. So that's what I see as vital for our ability to resolve conflict. Indigenous cultures also have very elaborate ceremonies that foster the resolution of conflict as well. So the implementation of ceremonies can also be a very powerful vehicle for helping to achieve peace.
And bringing community of people together, and so they don't feel so alone.
Sure, we're living in a world of tremendous isolation now. And so again, indigenous cultures have family and community as a vital part of the matrix of their life. And so to help alleviate alienation, is to bring people together in community. And that is another reason why there is ceremony. So ceremony not only allows for communion with the source, as well as the earth and the ancestors, but also brings people together. It unites them in commonality, for a common intent or purpose. And whether it be to pray for those that are suffering, for example, it provides a bond through which people can relate on many different levels.
Give me an example of some of the ceremonies and the ways that you practice and what you've seen in your travels in the world too.
Well, wherever I've gone and had the privilege to interact with indigenous peoples, with elders, medicine people, shamans, fellow chiefs, there are many, many beautiful different ceremonies. And what I really love about the indigenous way is that there really is a ceremony for everything. We have rites of passage that mark the thresholds that we pass through as human beings. There are songs and dances for everything, and so it creates a sacredness with each walk, with each breath that we take, that we're aware of the sacredness. My Lakota grandmother Victoria Chips, who passed away a few years ago, she said every step is a prayer. So every step is the awareness of the sacredness moment to moment. In terms of the ceremonies that we conduct here in the Bay Area, which are open to all people, I have what's known as an open altar, is that we have monthly purification lodges, or what are known as sweat lodges. We do traditional hambleche or vision quests, where a person can, what's called, the translation is to cry for a dream, so to go out onto the hill, as we say, and to fast from food, water, and sleep for a number of days, to receive guidance from the ancestors for their purpose and reason in life. We honor the cycles constantly, so we're doing full moon and new moon ceremonies, and equinox and solstice ceremonies, naming ceremonies, doctoring ceremonies, coming of age ceremonies. So there's just a plethora of different ceremonies that we do to help individuals heal, as well as to mark and honor the thresholds through which they pass in this life. We have deathing ceremonies, the dying ceremonies, marriage ceremonies. And so it's also, again, an opportunity for us to gather as a community, to pray and to support each other, and fundamentally remembering, so each and every one of us that's here has original instructions, as I prefer to call it. So we each have a unique destiny, a purpose that we've been brought here to fulfill for the purposes not only of ourself. So it's not self-serving, but it serves all of our relations. And it is incumbent as a human being to remember what that is. And as I said, I think that our current society is kind of predicated on fear and forgetting. So we're not really following a trajectory that's in alignment with the reason and purpose why we're here. We become distracted. And so community helps to support us in the remembrance of our original instructions. And when each person remembers what they're here to do for the benefit of the whole, that in and of itself will diminish suffering. And that is vital for our journey, so that we can find a way to diminish suffering and enhance the quality of our life.
That was a very beautiful saying of your grandmother. Every step is like a prayer. Mm-hmm. What do you think she meant by that? Elaborate more on the beautiful way of saying something so profound like that.
Well, we have a tendency to compartmentalize our worlds, right? So this is profane and this is sacred. And so, for me, every day is an opportunity to worship and to pray, to recognize my interrelationship with the Creator and the earth and the ancestors. So making every step a prayer is literally allowing yourself to be connected to the mystery, moment to moment. And so, even though we are engaged in earthly pursuits, as our feet are kissed by the earth, we maintain our awareness to the sacredness of creation, so that every interaction is divine. Every individual that we encounter is a sacred teacher, someone that the Creator has brought into our lives to help us learn about ourselves. Because fundamentally, as human beings, relationship is about learning. Right? Learning about ourselves, learning about our wounds, learning about what our gifts are, right? So that we can refine ourselves into, for me, the fullest expression of who we are as human beings.
It sounds to be also very important that to acknowledge the responsibility to be awakened to every moment of what it is to be totally alive. This expression of every moment is like a prayer. It's to be totally engaged in your own life on the fullest potential. It's very beautiful, very beautiful saying.
And that also speaks to the fact that we can expand. Right? So for me, I believe that we're not born as human beings. We become human beings based upon our conduct. Right? So that's why I said that I think that we've forgotten our fundamental humanity. So it's about remembering who we are as human beings. So, when we are conducting our lives in an honorable way, that's when we're truly remembering how to be human. So, fundamentally for myself as a human being, our first objective is to wake up, right? To stop the slumber, to end the inertia, right? So, because our life is so precious, our time here is so short, and we don't want to squander that. So we need to, the word I think about is domestication. We've become woefully domesticated as a species. And so it's remembering ourselves as the intrinsically wild and beautiful person we are, right? And that doesn't mean that we're not living in a respectful way in terms of society. But there's a way that through our actions and our conduct, we're falling asleep. And for me, like you spoke about Buddhism, right? So the Buddha was awake. He said, "I am awake," right? So it's embracing and achieving full wakefulness as a human being. That for me is fundamentally important. Secondly, it's the remembrance of our original instructions. It's to remember what we are here to do for the benefit of all of our relations. And through our journey, that can either be enhanced or compromised. And then thirdly, is to love unconditionally. And that may be the most challenging endeavor for us. But inside our DNA, and John Trudell, who is a very powerful and beautiful Lakota poet and activist, he said DNA is descendants and ancestors. Right? So it's not just deoxyribonucleic acid, but the DNA inside of us is descendants and ancestors. And so inside our DNA is an experience of unconditional love, right? So with few exception, when you have a child, you love that child unconditionally. So the mother and the father unconditionally love that child. So the experience of that child growing up is based on unconditionality, of unconditional love and support. That's inside of us, that experience. Now, even in contexts where the mother or the father do not love that child unconditionally, the earth, our mother, and the source also love us unconditionally. So we have that experience of unconditional love as a part of us. And we are often tested in our world, right, by creating conditions. So when we encounter individuals that will harm us, right, going back to peace, right, are we able to, for me, take a nobler road and not react with violence, right, which is much easier, right? H.G. Wells said, the first person to raise his fist is the first person to run out of ideas, right? So when someone harms us, whether it be deliberately or not, can we not retaliate and perpetuate the violence, but actually take a nobler road as a human being? In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they talk about the path of the Shambhala warrior, right? So the Shambhala warrior is, which is actually ties in with indigenous understanding and wisdom, right, is to walk a path of peace, right? So the warrior is not militant, right? Even in indigenous cultures, the warriors were not there merely to promulgate violence. Contrarily, that violence was only a last resort, right? That they would try other means first to achieve resolution and peace. Right? And I believe that is our charge and our responsibility now, right? Because in this cycle of violence, in the cycle of judgments and criticisms, all we're doing is creating a vortex, right, that is very difficult to extract ourselves from. Right? It requires all of us to have the courage, literally the heart, right, to embrace our fear, overcome our challenges, so that we can dream and live a world of peace, so that our children, right, do not have to suffer the same consequences and the same realities and circumstances that we're currently grappling with.
It seems to be a lot of this is not going around today, and it would take more effort on every individual part of different people to activate this and to be using it as a daily journey with great awareness. Mm-hmm. And if they are not doing that, it's so easy to fall into a deep slumber. Mm-hmm. And that would be a practice manners. The same old expression is waking up, putting the clothes on, and mm-hmm. just walking forth and getting it done, going to work, and mm-hmm. and then falling into a slumber on the weekends. Mm-hmm. But there's so much more to life. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be a lot of people are falling into a deep sleep, mm-hmm. just going through the motions of living, but it's not really living. It's barely surviving. Mm-hmm. So you're speaking on the highest level of the potential of what's there. Mm-hmm. But in order to live this potential, it takes some effort and an acknowledgement of that. Mm-hmm. And if that acknowledging is not done, the opposite is just a long sleep until they mm-hmm. finally pass out and pass away.
Mm-hmm. It's about deconditioning yourself. Right? There's a lot of conditioning. I mean, we are animals, mm-hmm. and so therefore, just like we can condition any animal, our society has also conditioned us. So it's to deprogram ourselves so that we can wake up, so that it's not, that our life is not by rote, right? That we can actually see the magic and the mystery and the adventure of life, and therefore wake up and be deliberate in our actions, deliberate in our thoughts, in our words, right? That's when we're living at this highest potential. And for me, that's the aspiration, right? To live as impeccably as possible, right? To really strive for impeccability. For me, the definition of impeccability is to endeavor to do one's best, to strive for excellence in everything that one is doing, right? Then there's no way that you can even criticize yourself. When you are striving for excellence in everything that you do, right, then there really, in my world, there is no failure. There's just learning. We continue to learn. And that is the blessings of being here, that we continue to learn and grow and evolve as a human being to our highest and fullest potential.
You mentioned that we become a full human. How do you think, or what is your thoughts about how we are born? Are we to be fully engaged as a full potential human, but what are we at our birth and as a young child? What are we at that time?
I think we're actually born as human beings. But as a result of our socialization and our domestication, we begin that process of forgetting. So, for me, it's about full circle, right? So when we're born, we're actually in a state of original blessing, right? We are, in the indigenous cultures of the world that honor the rite of passage of birth, right? There are very elaborate ceremonies. That child is welcomed as a blessing to the community, to the world, because they understand that this child has a gift for each and every one of us. Well, because of that connection to the source and the earth, right, there's a state of purity there, right? So that infant is a human being in its purest form. But then as a result of conditioning and socialization, etc., there is that process of forgetting. And so part of the journey is to remember what was intrinsically a part of us from the beginning. And that is the quest, and that is the journey. And I, personally believe that to draw upon the indigenous wisdom of this world is vital for us to remember how to be human, which is why the center offers intensives and ceremonies for people to remember and to help them. The word is excavate, right? They excavate the parts of themselves that are not serving them so that they can move to that place of absolute refinement, right? So it's not about judging the less than desirable aspects of ourselves. We need to honor that part because that is a springboard for awakening, right? To honor and see the wounds or the dis-ease as the vehicle and springboard for the medicine.
Allow that to be a teacher.
And the awakening, exactly.
All of the shadow sides of ourselves, that could be a great, great teacher.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
What do you think the state of the Native American Indian is from coast to coast in this modern world today? Have they forgotten their ways, or are they with a Christian way now, or what is actually going on now? So many years later from when Christopher Columbus came and they had their land to them. Mm-hmm. What's happening today in this modern world?
Well, it's hard for me to speak on to any tribe in particular.
Mm-hmm. But generally speaking across...
Yeah, in terms of my travels and my experience, there's a lot of intergenerational wounding that's taking place. I think it's really important for your watchers and listeners to know that as we speak, the indigenous populations, not only in North America, but throughout this world, are the most marginalized and misunderstood of all people. The conditions on the reservations, some of them are quite deplorable, very challenging. There's a movement afoot by many indigenous tribes to, because they are sovereign in terms of the federal government of the United States, to assert their sovereignty and their self-determination. There are projects to help preserve language, to preserve and protect culture. There are casinos, for example, and some of that revenue is being directed to the tribes in terms of housing, education, health and welfare. So it's a mixed bag. It's really a balance. But I still think that indigenous peoples deserve a voice in terms of this culture. I'm gratified to hear that Barack Obama addresses indigenous matters. He's one of the first presidents to do so openly. So I believe that it's important that the indigenous people of this nation be granted the same privileges of every other human being and citizen in this country.
At what level would you say that the wounding can be healed? And how long will it take? And really, what will it take for the indigenous Native American Indian?
I think a first step would be a formal apology. So I was quite surprised and gratified to hear that the previous Pope, not the current one, he made a formal declaration of apology to the indigenous peoples of the world for the atrocities that were perpetrated on them by the Catholic Church. I believe that there is a collective guilt here in North America regarding the genocide and the history of the past in relationship to indigenous nations on this continent. But there's not one president who has ever made a formal apology to indigenous nations. And if we look at interpersonal relationships, if you have harmed another individual, the way that you begin the reparation process is by an apology. Not just lip service, but an actually sincere contrition on the part of yourself toward another whom you've harmed. If the President of the United States made a sincere apology and commenced the dialogue necessary to begin that healing process, I think that would go a long way. Now, in addition to that, there will have to be reparations. There will have to be amends made to indigenous people so that they can also be granted the same rights and privileges that every other citizen of the United States is entitled to.
They are not at this point in time?
Oh, no. As we speak...
Tell me about that. Where is that?
Well, throughout
where do
the
they not have?
reservations.
And what do they not have that anybody else would have in America?
Well, if we go on the reservations, the challenges that they face in terms of health and housing,
Education.
right? Education, these are not readily available to most indigenous peoples. The average salary on the Pine Ridge Reservation, for example, annually is $3,500. How can a family possibly survive on that amount of money?
And they make that money where?
Through welfare, through trying to have jobs. See, besides that, employment is an issue on the reservations, right? So
they have to leave the reservation.
They have to leave the reservation to try to find
which is
employment.
great.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good thing? Or should they be self-sufficient is what I'm trying to...
Well, it's not engender self-reliance. You know, in order for them to have to leave, because that also, I mean, many reservations are sequestered and not necessarily having much contact with the surrounding cities, which are non-indigenous, right? I mean, I go to the Dakotas, to South Dakota. You know, in order to travel from Rapid City, South Dakota to Pine Ridge Reservation, which is the nearest reservation, is a 2-hour drive one way, right? So that would also necessitate an individual to find employment outside of the res, to leave their family, right, in order to find work, right? So that would be a 4-hour round trip, you know, just to be able to find work. That's, you know, quite a challenge. So the kind of opportunities that exist for indigenous people, it's not equitable in terms of our society. And I do believe that that's a function of the guilt that is a part of the consciousness of the colonized world, and the resistance to owning up to the history of the past to begin that process of healing and dialogue that I was speaking of. And I do encourage people to foray into the reservations, to take a look for themselves, because many people don't understand the realities that indigenous people face on a day-to-day basis in terms of survival. It would give them a much deeper appreciation for the challenges that they have to endure, and to do some research in terms of the history and the rather sordid history of how indigenous nations throughout the world have been treated by the colonial mind and actions. That in and of itself will bring some illumination to the fact that the genocide continues to this day. It's only taken a different form, right? So it's not necessarily outright massacres, but for example, you know, if we're going to talk about politics here, which is what we're kind of gravitating toward, on the reservations, the Dene, or what's known as the Navajo in the English, so the Dene reservations in the Four Corners area, there are people that are being actively removed from their homeland by coal companies, right, because of the interest that they have in the land, right? So the individuals, the indigenous nations have been placed and forced, often, so the Tsalagi, or the Cherokee people nation, there was a long march, right, from North Carolina to Oklahoma. Many, many thousands of people died in that forced march. So those marches are happening today, just in a much more subtle way, right? So there's coal interests by the government or by corporations that are removing individuals from their lands so that they can exploit the land in a disrespectful way, right? That's happening as we speak, right? And that's not just here in North America, throughout the world, right?
But that's happening to Caucasians and Orientals and Latins too, in their
the reservations
where they live
are predominantly occupied by indigenous people. So the coal interests are removing indigenous nations, indigenous people from their land for the coal. Okay, so
but wasn't that land given to them and it's theirs?
Exactly.
So they can come and take it away. And how do they accomplish this, the coal companies?
Well, just through politics, right? The corporations broker deals with the government, for example. And so that's basically what I'm saying, that
Do they relocate the people, the government?
But because indigenous peoples have such an intimate relationship with the land, when you displace a people, you're displacing themselves and their culture, and that creates more wounding.
Right.
It's not about just relocating into another home.
Oh, I understand, and I totally agree. But they do that. They just don't take the land and say.
No, well, some do just take the land and say you're on your own.
And you get nothing.
Right. Exactly. They don't get anything. There's no compensation whatsoever. Right. There are in Central and South America, right? The corporations, the big name corporations, beverage companies, are literally buying up land and water resources so that they can extract the water, create the beverages, and bottle the water and the beverages and sell them back to the indigenous people. There's absolutely no compensation that the indigenous peoples are being granted and given, right? So this, for me, is the quintessential tension between the colonial worldview and the indigenous one, right? And that's the strife that I'm referring to. And so maybe it's not outright genocide and murder, but it's subtle, right? It's still existing to this day. And though I'm not necessarily a political individual, right? My prayer is for all people that we can come together, right, in commonality, in solidarity, to heal the suffering of this world, right? But we as individuals have to be aware of what's truly happening. That's to wake up to the truth, right? So that we don't continue to perpetrate the fabrications of the past, right? To gloss it over, right? To really understand the truth about Thanksgiving, to understand the truth of what's happening on the reservations, right? We have buffered ourselves from the truth, and that doesn't serve us as a species, as human beings, right? It's important that we wake up and really see what's transpiring so that we can dream and work toward a better world for the future of all of our relations, not just some of them.
What has worked in the past of Gandhi, removing the English, Martin Luther King for the blacks, do you think it will take something like this, for example, for the Indigenous American Indian, to have somebody to speak up for them, a leader, and to make things happen, and their voices to get together in millions?
If we look about and examine the political uprisings that are happening right now in the Middle East, for example, it's not necessarily just one figurehead that is speaking for the people. Rather, I think because of the times that we're in, there's a momentum where several individuals, organizations or groups are coming together. So the voice is stronger. It's not a singular voice, it's a collective one. And for the times that we're in, if we have not one individual, but a collective of voices singing in harmony about the injustices of this world, it's going to be far more potent and powerful to have that transformation. Now, if there is an individual that can step forward and speak for the nations, that would be wonderful. But for me, I see that there are many individuals that are speaking and calling for justice.
That's very beautiful. For instance, in Tibet, it's not just one person, the Dalai Lama, or one individual putting all the attention and all of the injustices and what's going on in that country of Tibet that is so horrific, that it's the world looking at it, and it takes all the attention of all the individuals and all the world leaders to look at that and say, no, we are a collective on a world scale here, and this is not right.
I mean, if we look at the war in Iraq, for example, there was an outcry globally about the war, right? So there were demonstrations here, there were demonstrations all over the world that was saying that war is not the answer, right? That we, because of the degree of global interconnectivity now indigenous peoples throughout the world have spoken of this interrelationship from the beginning, right? So, grateful that Al Gore was able to kind of bring some light to the peril of the earth. But indigenous peoples, since the beginning, have spoken about the earth as our mother and that we need to take care of her. Now, unfortunately, because of the colonial mind, it required compelling science that Gore was able to present for him to appeal to that understanding. Whereas indigenous peoples have always spoken about the earth and that we need to take care of her.
So they were not heard. They were
Precisely.
ignored. And this is what's happening today. Perhaps people are not really knowing the flight of what's going on with Indigenous American Indian. They do not know the conditions on the reservation. They do not know that there's a lot of alcoholism and a lot of despair and a lot of depression. There's a lot of hopelessness going on there.
That's right.
And why is that? And how do people reach out to this? And why should people reach out to this? Because essentially we're all one.
Yep.
So if the Native American Indian is hurting, we are hurting. We are all hurting. So what is that? What is there to do there?
Well, the wound, again, comes from the strive for genocide and assimilation and colonialism. Right? There was a campaign of eradication, and in one sense, to remove the Indian from the man. That was actually one of the quotes that was cited early in the history, that through the boarding schools they were going to basically extract the Indian to save the man. Okay. As a result of that assimilation, or the attempt at assimilation, because indigenous nations are still alive, they're still strong, they're still continuing to practice their ways as well. But that wound then finds its expression in alcoholism, drug abuse, infanticide, suicide, serious unemployment, diabetes, across the board, right? As a people, they have the highest percentages of these afflictions, right? Again, how do we repair that? By being aware of what's occurring and beginning to change, to shapeshift those circumstances for them so that they can begin the process of healing, again, through formal apology, etc. Now, many of the indigenous nations have continued to preserve and protect their way of life, spiritually and culturally. And we need to continue to support that. Hence why I have my center, to actually make people aware of the rich and powerful wisdom that still exists in native country. Right? What most people don't realize is just how sophisticated and elegant the healing practices, the cosmologies of indigenous nations are. Right? It takes years and years of training. Right? Here is the other problem in terms of colonialism, is this notion that people can extract or remove, right, at will. Right? It's a much more consumptive kind of model. Well, in order to become a traditional healer, it requires years and years of devotion and praxis. Right? Now, there's an incident a couple years ago of an individual, a self-styled guru, who caused the demise, the deaths of individuals by performing a sweat hut in Arizona. Right? He was not sanctioned or qualified. Right? So part of it is kind of shape-shifting this New Age notion that it's okay just to participate in native ceremonies without appropriate training or qualification. And that's one of my intents at the center, is to help people understand that just like individuals know that it is unlawful to practice allopathic medicine without a license. In fact, there are scopes of training. I'm also an EMT, so I have a scope of training in terms of my allopathic practices, what I'm permitted to do by law, right? And it requires approximately 10 years of training to become a medical doctor in the allopathic paradigm. People wouldn't imagine or even conceive of practicing medicine without a license unless they wanted to accept the consequences of that. Well, people feel, particularly many people in the colonial world, that it's okay without proper training or sanction to participate or to practice these ceremonies or healing ways. And just like in the allopathic paradigm, native medicine is the same way. It requires training, years and years of arduous training, practice, approximately, in my travels throughout the world, speaking with other indigenous cultures and the healers, it also requires about 10 years of apprenticeship and training, right? There are safeguards, there are scopes of practice as well, in terms of what one is qualified to do as one continues to move up the echelon of responsibility in one's healing ways. Similarly, in the martial arts, right? It takes years and years to become a black belt, for example, and you begin to move up the echelon of mastery in terms of your martial practice as well. So we have these understandings in place, and yet for some reason, and I think because of the assimilationist attitude we've had, it's okay to take from indigenous cultures without reciprocity and without reverence and respect for them.
Is the wisdom still being preserved and passed down from the elders?
In my experience, it is, yes, absolutely. There are ceremonies that are being taken place all the time. What is lamentable is that the elders are passing away. My grandmother went home. There are many elders that are making the journey back home, and some are able to pass on their knowledge to those that are receptive and eager, and some of it is lost. There's a saying that when an elder who, say, devotes his or her entire life to the study of plant medicines, if that knowledge is not passed on, an entire library of botanical knowledge burns to the ground when they make their journey. A lot of indigenous medicine is not codified, right? So unlike, say, for example, the Buddhist Dharma, the Dharma teachings within Buddhism, a lot of the indigenous medicine is not codified, it's not written down, because it comes from an oral-based tradition. And so it's being able to sit with a medicine person and directly learn from them. Obviously, knowledge that's derived from direct experience is far more potent and powerful, and is the ground of wisdom than something that you derive from a book. So transmissions, and like in Buddhism as well, the Dalai Lama transmits, the Rinpoches transmit. Similarly, a medicine person is going to transmit knowledge and energy and wisdom into the practitioner.
Would you describe what a healing would consist of? When you say herbology, and would it consist of spirit and the wholeness of the person instead of aspects of a person? What would that mean to you?
Well, that's a rather broad subject and very involved, because indigenous healing embraces many modalities. And also the practitioner, a native medicine practitioner, is going to be firstly relying upon guidance from the ancestors. So his or her relationship to the spirits that are a part of his or her altar. They receive guidance, the practitioner receives guidance from the ancestors to be able to affect healing. And as I said, there's many modalities which are involved, and that a practitioner becomes adept in to be able to serve in that capacity. But most importantly is the invocation of the ancestors. So, traditional healers are very humble people. They don't take credit for the healing. It's the ancestors with whom they work. The ancestors, the spirits, do the doctoring, not the individual.
Have you seen cures of chronic diseases, of
absolutely.
Cancer or?
Mm-hmm. I have been party to that. Also, I've been blessed that I'm grateful to the spirits that work with myself, that there have been healings of very serious afflictions, cancer, lupus, MS.
Was traditional medicine being used?
Yes, traditional medicine was employed.
Oh, right. And conventional medicine, such as the
Not
pharmaceutical?
Not always. Right?
Not always.
So,
okay.
I also espouse collaborative medicine, right? So I don't prefer the words alternative or integrative or complementary. For me, I don't need to alter the native, right? Indigenous medicine is a complete and elegant system in and of itself. It has its own protocols, its own philosophical groundwork. So it doesn't need to be added to or subtracted from. So I don't need to alter the native, right? I want to collaborate with other modalities, right? When you talk about collaborative medicine or cooperative medicine, you're on equal footing. There's respect, right? When you speak about integrative, it's usually you're taking something from one system and incorporating it into another. And generally, it's that assimilationist model, right? We're going to take this seems to work, and we're going to place it over here. Same with complementary. Well, native medicine isn't a complement to allopathic. Again, these two systems are complete and they can stand independent of one another. But through a collaborative process that involves mutual respect, it allows for the individual to receive a healing on many levels, because the indigenous medicine involves healing of heart, body, mind, and spirit. It's a totality, right? A lot of allopathic medicine doesn't address the heart or the spirit. So when you bring practitioners together, each with their own language that can come together for the service of someone who is ailing, it only improves their possibility and chances of receiving healing. And for me, that's really vital. But indigenous medicine is powerful, and because it does draw upon spirit and the medicines of the earth, and the powers of the earth, that I've seen, and I've been privileged to observe other medicine people doctor and heal people with serious afflictions, and people have come to me with serious afflictions with great benefit as well.
In closing, Phillip, what would you like to share that you would like to speak about that was really dear to your heart?
I think what I would like to share is that there's an urgency to our times, that the prophecies speak of the times that we're currently in, this quickening. And it's vital for us to collectively awaken, that we cannot squander this time any longer, right? That we begin to see that we have to take care of this earth, that we have to take care of each other for future generations to come. That is what will guarantee our survival and those of all of our relations who are the keepers of the medicine. Right? As I said, we are the youngsters here, right? We need to see our elders and respect them so that we can learn from them. And it is vital for us to put down our differences, to honor the diversity of this world, so that we can come together for 7 generations of all of our relations to flourish on this earth.
Well, thank you very much. It was an honor and a pleasure to speak with you.
It's my pleasure, and I look forward to the opportunity to share again, and I pray that your viewers will come and pray with us and spend time with my community and myself, and to immerse themselves in indigenous ways with respect and reverence, so that they can glean something that can benefit their lives.
Thank you, Phillip. And thank you, and we'll see you next time. The Art of Conscious Living. Thank you.